November 3rd. You have one article to read for today, and you're going to need to fill out a message box for it. So let's call up what the message box looks like. Here you are, fill out your message box. You should either print this off from Moodle or have picked one up in your individual meeting with me. Okay, so this is the paper. This is a paper out of a journal called Global Change Biology. This is a journal that publishes only primary literature, so this is work that has not been published before and is going to be done in much more detail. The writing, you're allowed to have a lot more of it. You can have a lot more pages, a lot more figures. So articles in this journal and will end up being a lot longer. The nice thing about this, although it is longer, is that it goes into more detail, and it turns out to be a lot easier to read as a result. So it's going to explain basically everything. I'll explain this as I go through and sort of point out where that is coming in and where that's helpful. So this is going to be a paper about range change and abundance change. I want you to go ahead and answer the questions that we had in that activity where you had a table where you answered about the types of historical data and the uses of the historical data for those 4 different papers. We did that as a team activity. So answer those same questions here. What type of historical data are they analyzing? This is a resurvey, right? But are they doing presence only, presence absence? Are they doing abundance, and so on? Answer that question for yourselves. Do they address false absences? Do they address differences in methodology from the historical to the modern day surveys? And in addition, of course, you're doing your message box. They start off and they're going to place their work in the context of other people's work. This is where you find out what previous work has been done and why this paper is so important. Why should you read it? I'm not going to go through this article in a whole lot of detail because it already has lots of detail for you, but I will tell you this right here, small forest rodents, SFRs. You're going to need that abbreviation as you read, so know what that is. They're going to talk about how they gathered their data starting around here, so pay attention to that. There are a few parts of this that you can skim and that you can not read at all, so I will tell you that in this reading guide as well. Okay, keep going through here, and they actually excluded some of their data from some of the analyses. They had a lot of data, so pay attention down here when they start talking about what data they had to exclude. They've got another section over here, somewhere around here, so pay attention to that. I think that is really nice to see how careful they were with their data. They're going to describe the historic surveys here, so this section here you want to pay attention to. Then we get into some figures, which is great. This figure, first one here, figure 1, shows you where the sampling sites are. So you want to note these places. Where is St. Ignace? It comes up in the text. Where are the Huron Mountains? That becomes important. For some reason, the first time I read this paper, I missed this whole figure, and they kept referring to the Huron Mountains. I didn't know where they were. So now you know where the Huron Mountains are. They talk about Marquette. They talk about the tension zone here, so know what that is. Of course, you know what the lower peninsula of Michigan is and the upper peninsula, or the UP. They continue on this here to talk about data they excluded and why, so think about that. Then they talk about their modern methods, their trapping methods, that they're a little less intense, they did it for fewer days, and that's going to become important as they try to compare from modern to historic trapping and surveys. Here's that SFR coming up again. You already know what that abbreviation is. And here, I think this is a little weird, so pay attention to that. All right. They're going to start talking about differences in their methodologies, right? So how do they address them, verbally or with statistics? This is where you're going to look for that. And then they're going to define, and right in here, they talk about calculating abundance of each species, so somewhere around in here. That's going to be shown in Table 1, which comes up, I think, about 2 pages later here, Table 1. So when you get to table 1, you may be confused about what it's showing. Well, it actually explains it back here, even though it doesn't reference table 1. They then define something called a collection here, which they use in table 2. So you need to know what they call a collection, because that'll become important later. And then over here, I like how they talk about the probability of occurrence, and what are they addressing over here. That'll be an easy one for you to figure out. Okay. Now we get into a section where they're talking about their results. Okay, so we've gotten our background, we've gotten our methods, now we're into a new section called results. And I'm going to ask you just to start here, read through Peromyscus leucopus and see what they're talking about in figure 2. On the left side you have historical surveys, on the right side you have modern surveys. And this is just showing you where the samples were found, right? So you can see the gross difference in distribution of 2 different species. Leucopus is up here and Maniculatus is down here. So I want you to read through this first section here so you get an idea of how they talk about the range change for a species, right? They're going to talk about total expansion down here, really important. And then they have abundance and occurrence. And they do these 2 different sections for each species, okay? That's wonderful if you know a lot about these species and you care a lot about this. And I want you to read this one here. But you don't need to read that for every single species. I was really impressed, actually. I highlighted this section about the major changes in abundance and occurrence, right? And then on the next page, they start talking about the next species, its range, and its abundance and occurrence. And honestly, you don't need to read all that. So I'm going to tell you just to skip ahead, and I'll tell you where to pick up again. But you still need to look at table 1, so don't skip this page entirely. You're going to look at table 1, and one of the reasons you can skip reading about every single individual species is because table 1 summarizes all that data for you. Okay, they're telling you here, this keeps moving, they're telling you here the P level, the probability, right? So this is telling you if it's significant or not. Anything that says NS is not significant. Everything else in this table basically is significant. And then they divide it out by southern species here, northern species here, and they do that for each of their 3 sampling areas. So look at the trends for northern versus southern species, which ones are significant, if it's a positive or a negative in terms of direction of change. And they're looking at records, right? So percent captured. So know what this table is telling you for trends, and then you can just go ahead and skip ahead. You'll get to table 2, and you're going to want to look at the occurrence test. This is similar, where it's going to tell you, right, probability, and then it's going to tell you direction of change, and it's broken out by southern versus northern species. So pay attention to this. This is occurrence within the collections, right? I told you need to know what collection meant, so you can interpret this table. But here we are, just skipping ahead now, not reading the text here. You can take a look at another example. This is for Glaucomis, and you can see the change from here on the left side, the historical data versus the modern surveys. So you can see where exactly within the state are that individuals from that species being found. But let's not go ahead and read this text. Just unless you care very much about one of these species, you may read that. But I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on that. So where you do start picking up reading here is southern versus northern species. Here they're going to describe those differences in a little more detail that you saw in table 1 and table 2. Figure 4. Oh, and actually in this section they talk about the difference between becoming established and increasing their abundance, right? So we're looking at establishment, which is range change, and abundance. Those are the 2 components of this paper that you're paying attention to. Here we've got information about the common opossum, and it's another one of these graphs where they're showing you historical captures versus modern captures, and so you can see the movement there. So read this legend to figure out what that's showing you. We've got another way of showing changes in composition this time, and this is in figure 5. Very helpful. Think about the different ways that changes in composition were were shown in other papers, right? So in Moritz et al., we had a different way of showing community composition change than pie charts. Think about that and what's a better method or a worse method, or why you might choose one over another. The lighter color here is going to be northern species, and you can figure that out if you read the legend and highlight the different abbreviations for the different species. You need to do that kind of annotation to figure out what the figure means. Okay, a couple of things that I highlighted as I was reading. This is about the changes in community composition here, and then this summary statement is critical. This is going to probably show up in your message box, or at least is going to be burned into your memory by the end of this paper. Okay, this section, replacement or addition, this is now we're into the section here where they're starting to interpret their results, which is pretty fun to see how they're doing that, and they're just doing it a little bit here. The next section, discussion, they're going to really get into it. But so as you're seeing more southern species showing up in the northern habitats, are they replacing species that existed there in the past, or are they just adding more biodiversity? That's the question, and they're going to address that here, which is great. They start getting into comparing the amount of effort and number of individuals trapped in their modern versus historic sampling trips, and then they're going to show you the change in temperature, right? So this isn't global temperature change. You'll remember from reading the methods that this is very, very localized. Okay. Now is where we get, okay, here's a little more of that climate change here, but here's where we get into discussion even more. And so they're going to talk about limitations of collection records. This is something, of course, we care much about, and we want to know how they address it. There's a section in here where they start talking about looking at relative abundance. And I think this is a really interesting take on using historical records and comparing them with modern times. What do you think of this idea? Make a note to yourself to really look at that and then think about it for yourself. Is this a good idea? Is this how you think we should do it? They're going to talk here about something that we've already read about quite a bit. What term are they talking about? Something that we know from the review article, we know is important when looking at historical data. In a paper where you have so much room to talk about your results, you can really do a lot of interpretation, really, really analyze your results and try to sort out what different hypotheses might be playing a role here. So there are a couple of things in here. They talk about an alternative explanation for range expansion somewhere around here. And that, I think, is a great thing to think about. And think about this for this paper, and then think back to the Moritz paper. They didn't address a lot of these other ideas. They didn't have the space, right? But they didn't address a lot of these other potential alternative hypotheses that they're going to go into in great detail here. So think back on that paper. We have causes of change, and they have these large-scale trends that could be related to the change that they're seeing, and then they're going to go through in the rest of it and determine which one of these three there's the most evidence for. So that's basically what's happening throughout here. You're going to want to read that nice and closely, and then you get to the end. So we'll work on this in class. Come with your message box complete. You will hand that in, and we will do some activities in class. All right, enjoy.